From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
July 2025. We are now halfway through the year. So what better time to reset and take stock of the first 6 months?
The biggest stories so far this year in Michigan politics.
And who better to turn to than Emily Lawler, politics editor of the Detroit Free Press, and Chad Livengood, politics editor of the Detroit News. Hey, you two.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so you have your assignments. We asked you to look back at the year 2025. We are now halfway through. Let's turn to the biggest stories out of Lansing and Michigan politics so far.
Emily, let's start with you. What's your top story?
Yeah, so this is just a big political shift pick, and I started chronologically in January because that's when we learned that Gary Peters would not run for re-election to the U.S. Senate. And the race began, so to speak. And it's truly begun. There are a plethora of candidates to choose from. Names you've heard, certainly, on both sides. We have a current congresswoman running. We have, Mallory McMurrow, who's built sort of a national profile. And of course, this seat is a rare seat. It doesn't usually come up. It never comes up 2 cycles in a row. I think we just threw 2026 in a totally different direction.
Yeah, last Republican U.S. Senator was Spence Abraham.
Okay, Chad Livengood, you heard Emily's the surprise announcement that Democrat Gary Peters was not going to run for the U.S. Senate in 2026, leaving this wide open Senate race. What was your top story so far the first 6 months of 2025?
Yeah, I had the Peters retirement and all the cascading effects as my number one story, too.
No way!
Just starting with, as Emily alluded to, all the different races that are now opened up. I mean, you got the Stevens seat. Potentially, if Bill Huizenga decides to challenge Mike Rogers for the Republican nomination, then his seat in West Michigan opens up, and suddenly Democrats see a potential area that used to be rock rib Republican has been starting to get more and more to the center. They think that they have an opportunity there. Then you already have John James decides to run for governor. I would put these all in one big basket of statewide races and how it's shaking up the map. John James is going to abandon a seat that John James is probably going to win re-election in. It's in suburban Detroit in Macomb County in Rochester Hills area.
Right,
of
the congressional
County,
seat.
The congressional seat, the 10th congressional. And that now leaves that very vulnerable. On top of that, you have the president of the United States, who is now just kind of like openly said out loud, he's not very happy with John James giving up this seat because he knows he's just a few votes away from essentially the second impeachment or third impeachment if the Democrats were to retake the House. And so this is a seat that Democrats think they can win in the suburbs of Detroit. So then you have Tom Barrett, freshman in the 7th congressional, who is vulnerable. And so you have these congressional seats that are going to be now at play. And that all started with Peters leaving and with the governor's race opening up. This is the biggest story of the first 6 months of this year. It's just the continuing, ever-moving shift of people running for different seats. I'm not so certain that Mike Duggan would be running for governor right now if he didn't know that there was this chaos right now between the two parties. And he's able to, say, I'm going to run as an independent. I'm going to go to Lansing and clean things up.
We're at number one and already just a head-spinning cascade of developments. So, Emily, give us your number 2.
Should we let Chad do his number 2 first? Because I don't want to steal his twice,
Oh, fair, Chad.
Okay, Chad.
Okay. My number 2 is going to be the rise of Matt Hall, the Republican Speaker of the House. Hall has kind of taken some people by surprise. Now, people that know Matt Hall have watched him develop his political chops over the years, not so surprised. I mean, he came up through the grassroots, built himself into a leader. And once the new term limits changed, the guy got a mission and he could realize he could be speaker for 6 years. And he's now just like trying to live his best life. And he seems to be the only person in Lansing who's really having fun with his job right now and really just enjoys the sport of politics. I mean, he got a big deal at the beginning of the year by getting the Democrats in the Senate to agree to roll back a minimum wage increase for tipped workers and for other, and then also roll back paid sick time, getting Democrats to essentially just completely abandon some of their many talking points for like a decade and do a deal like that. Now, the legislature hasn't done jack squat basically ever since then, but he is the guy who is holding a lot of the keys right now. We haven't seen a leader in the legislature like this in quite a long time. I think Rick would concur with that.
I would concur. I mean, to that point, Emily, does it seem like the Republican House Speaker, Matt Hall, is sort of filling a void?
I think he stepped into a unique position because we went from Democratic control to Republican control. And this is really the first fresh face for House Republican leadership in a while. I think Chad's right that he's really sort of built up that resume. And also, I see a little bit of like Trumpism in him, and that he's just interested in making deals or stopping deals or looking good doing it. I feel like he's got this sort of attitude going in where he's willing to wheel and deal with Democrats. He's sort of, in some ways, I think that Democrats can talk themselves in circles to the extent that they aren't getting much done legislatively. We certainly saw that during lame duck when we expected a flurry of action with the last gasp of the democratically controlled House and Senate, and just really didn't see it. It was the tamest lame duck on record, ended early. Of course, there were some attendance issues in the House. I think Matt Hall learned from that. It seems like he's doing some sitting back and seeing what happens. He's also throwing some firecrackers into the mix where it makes sense. Yeah, I like that one. That's a good number two, Chad.
A question to both of you. One word, one name. Who in Lansing is driving the agenda right now?
Doesn't seem like anybody.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I just don't think, what is the agenda? Like outside of getting the budget done, which is the one constitutional thing they're obligated to do every year, I have no idea what the agenda is.
I mean, for months there, it was Matt Hall. I mean, he was just grabbing every microphone and get his hands on, holding these weekly press conferences, just driving the Democrats in the Senate nuts. I mean, certain senators over there just it's like fingernails on a chalkboard, the sound of Matt Hall talking. So, but now like they've kind of gotten a little more savvy. I'd say kind of since Mackinac, they've decided, hey, we're not gonna deal with this guy. They've clapped back at him a little bit. Now, the interesting part about that is just recently, this group associated with the Democratic Governors Association took out some ads against Democratic senators trying to get them to go back to Lansing and do a deal on roads. And the two people who've been wanting to do a deal on roads are Governor Gretchen Whitmer and Speaker Matt Hall. And even Whitmer said only Matt Hall has had the guts to introduce something. And Senate Democrats seem to be completely not interested. There was a pecking order of who's driving the agenda. It'd probably be a tie between Hall and Whitmer right now, and somewhere further down is Winnie Brinks and the Senate Democrats.
So, Emily, your number two story.
All right. My number two is maybe somewhat in the same vein. My number two is legislative inaction. So I didn't focus on Hall as the personality, but I do like that lens. So maybe I am in the position of stealing Chad's again as well. But I think Chad mentioned we saw that sort of initial push where there was sort of this looming deadline court created where they solved some minimum wage problems for themselves, minimum wage and paid sick time implementation, got to a compromise there. I think everybody was interested in making a deal on that. And we really haven't seen much since. In terms of policy, it's been a really slow policy year. It sort of seems like the chambers are volleying things to each other that they know wouldn't pass the other chamber, instead of working out in a back room or tossing somebody something appetizing, or a nice political trick as tossing someone something that they'd look bad if they rejected. I really don't see that. I see each chamber working independently and also like in direct opposition to each other's views. Like I think about 2023, the start of the first year of the last legislative session, and just how much big transformational campaign promise type stuff was getting done. Obviously, two Democratic chambers, a different control paradigm, different calculus. But I was expecting, after hearing both Matt Hall and Gretchen Whitmer talk a lot about reaching across the aisle and what they could do, I guess I was expecting some more policy movement, and we really haven't seen it. And on top of that, we haven't seen much budget movement, which, like I said, is the one thing that you do expect to see. It's a perennial favorite this time of year. And hopefully we won't be sitting here talking about why it's not moving on October 1st.
That is Emily Lawler. She is politics editor at the Detroit Free Press, and Chad Livengood is here as well, politics editor of the Detroit News. As we are rounding up the top 3 political stories so far, as we have reached, if you can believe it, halfway through 2025. Okay, we are on to our third and final question, which is your third top politics story of 2025. Emily, going to start with you this time.
All right, I'm going with Whitmer in the Oval Office, but more broadly, what it means. So, Democrats were pretty crushed after their losses last November. I think there's been a lot of talk about how they regroup, what direction they go in from here. Certainly, there's a more moderate vein of the party that Whitmer's kind of embodying right now by working with Trump to achieve, to be clear, some big priorities. A commitment on suffrage is something that has been a prize that everybody has been after in the Michigan delegation, certainly the people who've represented that district, certainly a vested interest of governors past. And to get that commitment from the Republican president as that woman from Michigan, as he once, actually, I think that was a little bit of a misnomer, but in any case, she really pulled it off, right? You can't argue with that. And, I think there's just sort of this tension in the Democratic Party that's like, hey, maybe we work with President Trump, maybe we get some wins. And then the opposite of that is not working with President Trump and continuing to hammer him and trying to put up candidates that are substantially different, more progressive, maybe divesting a little bit from the bigger campaign finance machines and funders. And there's been a lot of protests against President Trump, certainly in Michigan and elsewhere. There's been a lot of unrest, but I don't think that the Democrats have fully decided what direction they're going. Republicans have the advantage, to be sure, of having President Donald Trump, who is, a party figurehead and a leader, and they can kind of just defer to him on a lot of those questions. And I think Democrats are very much duking it out for who and what the future of the party might be.
And Gretchen Whitmer trying to have it kind of both ways, that when, you look at things like getting Selfridge Air Force Base and cooperating with the Trump administration, but at the same time, banging the drum on Medicaid cuts, which will have a potentially huge effect in Michigan.
Yeah, and the kidnappers. I mean, Trump has floated pardoning the folks convicted on the federal level for the kidnapping plot against her. And that's a pretty personal strike against a fellow elected official you just struck a deal with. So certainly there are points of divergence, but I think we would say that in general, her approach has been pretty collaborative with the Trump administration.
Okay, Chad Livengood, drum roll, your final third story, political story of 2025.
Okay. My number 3 has a chance to rise to number 1.
And I think I know what it is.
Okay. My number 3 is the investigations led by Attorney General Dana Nessel. I've said this recently. Dana Nessel has the matches in her hand and could very well burn down Lansing on her way out the door in the next 18 months. That's a big, wide statement, but let me explain. First, the investigation of Faye Baydoun, the Whitmer appointee donor who got a $20 million grant in the state budget and who was found to be spending $550,000 a year on her own salary and $4,500 coffee makers and $11,000 first-class flights to Budapest for a business development organization that seems to have gotten some favorable support from the Whitmer administration and the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. This was all part of that late-night billion-dollar spending spree on June 30th, 2022, that we're all still very much documenting how the money was spent. And this one has got Dana Nessel's attention. This raid that she authorized of the MEDC's offices on June 18th, an extraordinary act by an attorney general to raid an office of state government of which her department is technically supposed to represent in most matters. We've not seen something like this, and there's an ongoing court fight over the documents related to it. But more broadly, she's got an ongoing case against Heather Lombardini, longtime Republican political consultant, in a kind of a dark money fundraising scheme involving the former Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey. She's also got an upcoming trial, possibly, against a former House Speaker, Lee Chatfield, that could start this fall. And Lee Chatfield's aides, in alleging that they stole hundreds of thousands of dollars essentially use the power of the Speaker's office to just raise tons of money and then go live lavishly. Nessel is going after what she believes and termed to be corrupt behavior and really striking a heart in the culture of Lansing right now. And I think it's got a lot of people nervous. And this Beydoun thing has a potential to creep into the Whitmer administration and turn into a full-fledged scandal on the hands of a governor who has been pretty scandal-free for most of her time in office.
Another good point from Chad. Nessel came in as an outsider to state government. She hadn't served in the legislature. She was not a creature of Lansing. In fact, I think you could argue that the Democratic establishment did not have her as their top choice for that nomination. Obviously, it happens in a convention process.
You could argue that, yeah.
And she brought a lot of people to that convention, and she was seen as sort of this more progressive outsider voice. I think she's done that. I see that in a lot of what Chad has mentioned in terms of investigations. I also see it in things like the utility filings. Like, she has made a point to stand up against these big sort of, I call them blanket donors, utilities are, right? Like, everyone in Lansing sort of has a little bit of a connection to them in some way, usually if you go through enough campaign finance reports. And, I think she's sort of taking on institutions in a different way than we've seen from past attorneys general, and also in sort of a different way than you'd see from someone who's in and of the culture of Lansing. So I think that's a really good point number 3.
And it's interesting, thinking about circling back to both your number one stories, right? The retirement of Michigan U.S. Senator Gary Peters. And there were questions about whether or not Attorney General Dana Nessel would decide to run for that seat. And now, taking on both Republicans and Democrats, it makes you wonder what that political future looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we saw with what we've seen that's going on right now, this fight between the MEDC and Nessel's office, they're not holding back. We saw Bill Schuette, having a team investigate Flint, make charges against some cabinet level people and some lower level people at the Department of Environmental Quality over the Flint water crisis. But he didn't go into the governor's office. He just went as far as he needed to beat back Brian Calley in a primary challenge. And that's why it's like Nessel's got a lot of power. Maybe the most powerful person in Lansing right now is Dana Nessel. And is there more dark money accounts out there that she's looking into? Do they go into Democrats and Republicans? How does she play this? And then who in this sort of dragnet does she catch? And I think that's kind of the unanswered question right now.
And I would say timeline is a question too. You look at one of her marquee cases is like the fake electors case. It's been in the court system for 4 years, right? So
yes.
I question how quickly she can move on all of these fronts and how quickly the courts can move on all of these fronts. A little TBD there, but I did get the sense when we were learning some of the Chatfield details, keep in mind these expense accounts, like the ones he's using, are secret. I very much wonder that if you opened the hood of any one of them, if you'd find similar spending or questionable expenditures. I have no idea.
Yeah, in the Lombardini case, they have opened the hood on the donors recently, and it gave us some revealing details. It was kind of what we expected, but then you started looking at, okay, there's some interest groups here that were giving money to the effort to repeal the governor's powers, and one of them was like Health Alliance Plan, an insurance arm of Henry Ford Health. That the chairman of Henry Ford Health was the chair of the governor's reopening committee, or group, as you might recall, back during the pandemic. So it kind of exposed that, like, when it comes to Lansing interest groups, they hedge bets and they bet on every horse in town if they need to in order to get what they want. How much more of the hood peeking is Nessel going to give us? That makes a political journalist pretty excited.
So much corruption, so little time.
That is Chad Livengood, politics editor at the Detroit News. Emily Lawler, politics editor of the Detroit Free Press. You came with receipts. You did your homework. A+ for coming up with your top 3 Michigan politics stories so far, we should note, of 2025. Hey, you two, thanks so much for the time.
All right. See you December 30th.
Yeah, right. We'll have to do an update on December 30th. Absolutely. For the entire year. Bye. And we want to hear from you. What are your top Michigan political stories so far of 2025? Shoot us an email and let us know. We're at politics@michiganpublic.org. Again, that is politics@michiganpublic.org. And that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Let's talk again next week.